Welcome, everyone. You found Sanctuary's Coffee and Conversation Show. I'm Myrna Haskell, Executive Editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online publication for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, philanthropy, health and wellness, culture, and community. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. This morning, my guest is Lisa Braxton. She is the author of the award-winning book, Dancing Between the Raindrops, A Daughter's Reflections on Love and Loss. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Lisa.
Well, thank you for having me.
The book is wonderful. We have it excerpted in Sanctuary Magazine. If you didn't see it, the exclusive excerpt last month, you can find it directly from our homepage from the book excerpts graphics. So please go take a look at that and buy Lisa's book. Our topic today is a journey through grief. And the reason we've titled it that way is obviously for those going through grief or losing a loved one, it's a process and it's a journey and it's something that everybody does differently. So I wanted to start off by allowing you to take the time, Lisa, to tell listeners a little bit about your book, the backstory, perhaps the inspiration behind you writing it.
I had no plans to write a book. I was dealing with my mother's illness, my dad's illnesses, my having been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I lost my job. My husband lost his job. This all was going on around the
Wow.
same period of time, let's say 2019. And in 2019, mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. It was caught early, thank goodness. My dad had Parkinson's, and we didn't know this at the time, but prostate cancer. And so I've been writing for many, many years. I started out years ago as a journalist at a newspaper, and I've been writing short stories and essays. And eventually in 2019, my novel came out. And so when my parents their health was declining, I naturally was interested in just reminiscing. You reminisce about the good old days with with your loved one, the fun things you did, mom and dad raising me, the fun we had. My father was always more of a playful parent. My mother's more the disciplinarian, and just reminiscing about those things. And I was writing these stories about them. At the same time, one benefit of having lost my job was I had more time to spend with my parents. I'm in the Boston area. They were in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I would go there. Also, while I was there and they were resting, I would read a book, read a grief memoir. And I read several grief memoirs, and they inspired me to do some writing. And after I'd written quite a bit, I thought, I think I have enough here for maybe a collection. So I sent word out to some of the smaller presses because I understand that if you write a memoir, unless you're a famous person, it's really hard to get much attention
Yeah.
from the big publishers. So I contacted maybe half a dozen small presses.
Thank
And I've been
goodness we still have a few of those, right?
yes. And it actually
It's
was,
been dwindling, the number of indie presses and those smaller presses, right? We have the big ones with all the imprints, but good for you for knowing how to navigate that space. That's another whole conversation, I suppose.
yes. And the beautiful thing was it's a female-owned press, Sea Crow Press on Cape Cod. She was interested and she said, well, you've got about 60 pages here. We don't do chapbooks. I was thinking maybe a chapter book, but she said, we don't do chapbooks, but we do full-length publications. And if you can continue writing to at least 100 pages, we'll publish you. I'll give you a contract. So I was just writing and thinking of stories, thinking about memoir, things that happened with mom and dad and me, and wrote more than 100 pages. And I had the idea of including photos, also family pictures in the book. And it was published in March of 2024. And as I said, no intention of writing a book, but that's what came out of my grieving was writing and producing something that I hope other people will be able to relate to and will give them some comfort as they are going through their grief.
And I think, though, that the extraordinary other circumstances that you had going on as well with your own illness. I mean, it seems like it was a bit of a pile on. It was one thing after the next. I mean, that it's so tough. A lot of our listeners right now are dealing with illness with elderly parents. I have two elderly parents who, thank God, are still with us. But, we all struggle with watching parents decline. And that's such a hard thing, especially when you come from a close-knit family. And I know your parents were very involved in their community too, business owners. Your dad, I think, was involved in the NAACP. And so you grew up in an environment where your parents were all about community and family. And then you see that you're going to lose that part of your family. That has to be really, really tough. And then you're struggling with your own illness on top of that, because doesn't everybody tell us, keep your own strength if you're going through something like this so you can help those who are suffering. But here you had your own difficulties you were going through that must have been so scary. So I applaud you for writing this book and helping others, and they can see that somebody in your circumstances was able to get through. Everybody's different, right? Everybody's journey. I know they talk about the stages of grief. um, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that, the fact that the journey is different for everyone, and whether or not certain stages were really difficult for you, how you dealt with some of those challenges.
Yes, years ago, when I was a teenager, probably, I'd read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book about the stages of grief. And so I was familiar with these stages. And in recent times, when my parents were ill, I was going to a support group online. It was during COVID. So I was on a support group online with other people who are grieving. And I found that in my case, there are some stages I didn't go through. I know there's one stage, anger. I didn't feel angry. I think because I had my parents for a long time. My father was 90 when he passed away. My mother was 83. It was a shock when she got sick because she and I had been talking about how bad off my father was with his Parkinson's, and his mobility was an issue, and he had dementia. Although my mother didn't want to, she was in denial about his dementia. I had a doctor friend who said it sounds like he has dementia. So he was not making very good decisions on a lot of different things. And so I didn't feel angry because I had them until they were so old, and denial was there on my part. I didn't want my parents to go. I didn't want to see how bad off they were. I wanted them to live forever. And so that was one of the areas where I did feel denial. No regret, because mom and I especially talked about everything. Toward the end, when she did home hospice, and she was in her hospital bed in their bedroom. And I was reminiscing, Mom, do you remember the time that you had that toaster that kept burning the toast, and you would scrape off the burnt part and throw it in the yard? And I told her, I said, I was probably a toddler. She would put me in the backyard, and she would put the radio on, and it would be playing the Beatles when they were very popular way back. And she would take this, scrape it off, throw the toast out of the yard for the birds to eat. And I told her that I would go out when you had me out there, I would go and find it, and I would eat it before you made my breakfast. And so we had a big laugh about that and a lot of different things. So with both mom and dad, I didn't have any regrets. One thing that was helpful too was that in the support groups, they talk about the different stages, and they say, you may have stages that come years later. They may not come in a sequence. They may come later, or you may not have certain stages. So I understood that these are normal things to feel. If you don't feel certain ones, well, your situation is different from everybody, other people's, and it's understandable to go through these different stages. So yes, I have gone through different stages at different points of time, and it's normal.
Yeah, it is normal. I think that it's sounding to me like these wonderful memories you had about growing up, and your relationship with your mom was really close. Mine is too. So even though you had all of that time with them, it's still, really difficult to lose your person or your people who you were so close with. You can always go to your mom, right, for advice. I personally believe that she's still with you in your heart, and you can still take advice for her in some way because you hold her so close. So there's that. But what about those that are listening, who maybe haven't, it seems like you've come through out the other side. You have this beautiful book that you've written to help others. And so you're in a new space now. But what about for some of those who may be listening who feel like they're never going to be happy again? and I know you've just mentioned you had been to some support groups. You've probably noticed in some of those groups that some folks were struggling a little more than others. Do you have any personal advice about that, or maybe perhaps times you felt really down at times, something that helped you come out of that at all?
I have felt down, and I still do feel down at times. And I actually felt down when I was writing the book. Once I got the contract, and the publisher said, "Well, you've got 60 pages here. We'd like you to write more." I had to go deep into my memories about growing up and about different situations throughout the years with mom and dad. It wasn't easy. My sister asked me about that. How was the process of writing this book? And I said, there were times that I would write certain essays and I have to lie down and just lie down afterwards and just rest, just be still. And I think with grieving, sometimes you have to go with it. You're grieving, if you can, just focus, just let yourself be in that grieving moment. And my grieving, I describe it as like a wave. And so some days I'm fine, some moments I'm fine, some moments I'm feeling down. I miss them, and the shock of it comes, it comes back to me. And I feel like grieving, I can be happy and I am happy, but my happiness is not the same as it was when I had them. It's different now. It's like my grieving is like a coat that I wear, a warm coat that's comfortable. But my happiness is just not pure happiness. It's with the memory of them losing them. So it's morphed into something where it's happy. I'm happy, but I will never be the same.
It's
I will never be
different.
the same. Yeah, it's a different happiness. And then also when I've gone through different support groups, and I went through GriefShare. It's a 13-week program. It's very popular around the country, and a lot of churches sponsor it. And finding that when I'm in a group like that, support group, other people talk about what they've gone through and their grief. And I'm able to connect with others, connecting with other people, finding a grief community has been helpful to me. And I'm also now a facilitator for GriefShare. Now that I've gone through the program as a participant, I now facilitate, and that's been a
That's
beautiful thing
wonderful.
to have
And
that
that
my
probably,
perspective.
the facilitation process probably helps you too, though, right?
Yeah,
It's a mentoring really situation that you're in at this point, I guess. And that must make you feel good inside that you can help others who are in an earlier part of the journey and still really, really struggling. I loved your analogy about the coat, putting a coat over yourself. I have to imagine that it is fatiguing and very draining, to the soul and mind, but also physiologically going through these kinds of emotions as you go through them. And I think I'm also hearing from you that for you, and I think for many out there, having a support group like that is so huge because really, if you haven't gone through it yet, it's hard you can speak to best friends or, you know, other people about it that you trust and you feel comfortable talking to about it. But it's a big difference when you're talking to somebody who's actually experiencing it, right?
yes, yes. So I've had a couple of coworkers recently whose mothers had passed away, and I felt comfortable going to them and saying, "I'm sorry about what's happened. I'm there for you if you want to talk." I lost my mom, as you know, I lost my mother and my father, and I don't know what you're going through, but I know what I went through, and I know it's hard. I would not have had that perspective before my parents passed away. So before they passed away, there were times when a coworker was grieving or someone I knew, and I didn't know what to say, and I was afraid to even approach them sometimes. But now, with what I've gone through, I feel like I can be a comfort to others, and I want to. I want to be a comfort to others, and I have that now. I have that unfortunate experience of having lost loved ones, and it's made me I think add a texture to my life and added something that I can give to others in support.
I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa, because I think it's such an uncomfortable subject, right? So I think people have a hard time with it. They don't know if the person maybe who's experiencing the grief wants a lot of people around them, right? Or if it's somebody who just wants to kind of curl up for a while and be alone and maybe even close the door and shut the lights down and they just don't want to have visitors in the early stages. And because I think people don't really know, how the person who's experiencing the grief is going to take someone trying to help or talk about it, that lots of times people just don't say or do anything at all. Because I've talked to parents and people that have lost, young children too. And the fact that after the funeral is over and all the initial, people bringing food and all of that happens, and then they're left there without their loved one, and particularly when it's a child who's died way before their time, so to speak, people are afraid, to come by. And this particular person had said, I needed somebody to come by and just say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here, kind of thing. And so I think people are really uncomfortable. So when we do have someone like you who's gone through it, who's willing to be a facilitator and a mentor and someone who can help those because you've gone through it yourself, that part is so important. Because eventually, I think even for those who don't want to socialize or have people around or have people bring food, that eventually they may come to that point where they're ready to open themselves, right? I'm sure you've experienced people that have been both ways. They need people around them constantly, or they need to just shut themselves away for a while, right?
Yes, yes, I have. And in fact, we've been, my husband and I, with our church, we've been there for church members who are dealing with the loss. And in some instances, we've gone to individuals' homes. Like the wife was, the husband was passing away in this instance. And we went to her house to see about the husband he was going to pass away in a few days. And we just sat there in the living room with the husband, and she was upstairs doing other things. But the fact that we were physically there made a difference, I feel. So when my mom and dad were ill, and we had the pastor came by and other people came by, even though they couldn't fix it, they couldn't do anything but be supportive. And the fact that they were physically in our house, there with us, that made a
Yeah.
big difference. That's one of the things that sometimes when people don't know what to say, they don't have to say anything. I'm here, I'm supporting you, and I'm physically here. I'm just going to sit here for a while. We don't have to talk. We can just sit here and be quiet. And if you want to, I'm here. And that's one way to deal with getting used to not knowing what to say. It's just physically being there.
Yeah, I can see that. I have a really good visual of that too, because some of the services and then afterwards that I've been to, um, you can see the comfort that's there when the house is full.
Mhm.
And I think that lots of times it's the aftermath and then who comes again, who can you talk to when everyone's gone, so that tends to be, I think, lots of times hard for people too. But we definitely need mentors and facilitators and people who aren't afraid to come forward and ask the person if they need help or that they're there for sure. Since you're such a veteran and a former journalist, and this is not your first debut novel either, this memoir is your second book, I think, right? I was
Yes.
hoping that we could talk about process a little bit,
Okay.
about what it was like to write this book. I know you've said a few things about it that you weren't thinking of writing a book initially, but you've obviously had a lot of other projects. You've been doing a lot of writing, so was it cathartic for you anyway? Did you take lots of days off in between and then write again? Was it something that just came out all at once you started really getting into it after the first 60 pages? Whatever you want to say about the process. I'm sure we have a lot of writers who follow us, so I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
I always say my process is like making hamburger. You don't want to see the process, but the end product looks good. I
Okay.
just would find time because I work full time. And I also do volunteer work, and I have a husband and a dog. So I'm pretty busy with all those things. And I mentioned church earlier. So this church and Bible study. So I write in between other things. Sometimes I take the commuter rail in. I live in the Boston suburbs, so I'll take the commuter rail on the train. I'll do some writing. My ride is of about 45 minutes. So I pull out my notebook and I write on the way home. I'll write sometimes at lunchtime. If I have time at lunchtime, I'll write. At home, I'll do some, especially in the mornings on the weekend. So for me, it's just concentrated time when I have the time. The library was good for me because once I'm at the library, I'm stuck. I can't be distracted by the laundry or the dog barking or
That's
other
right.
things.
That's tough, right?
Or my husband saying, "Do you have a minute?" Yes, I have a minute. And then he'll start talking about something and it's like 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
So if at the library, I'm stuck. There's no one else there that I know. no distractions. So I just find time in between other things. Sometimes I'm driving and I get ideas for my writing, and I'll just pull my phone out and I'll record myself talking about what my idea is. So and yes, that's how I write. It's just a mismatch of time, and it was cathartic. And sometimes, as I mentioned, sometimes I would have to lie down after writing something. But I will say that after my book was published, I had it on my nightstand, and there are times when I will open the book up and I'll read something that I wrote. I'll start laughing, I'll reminisce. Even after reading the book now, reading different parts of it, that's cathartic. I'll laugh out loud at something like the squirrel we had in the freezer for months because my father's uncle, or my father's brother, my uncle came up with it because when they were kids, they would catch squirrels and fry them up. And so, and so then he's my uncle's like, oh, here's this. Remember how we used to get squirrels? And so it's in the freezer for months. My mother's like, are you gonna cook that thing? And it was like, oh my gosh. I was a teenager and this thing is in the freezer. It was a very
Right.
interesting situation. But reminiscing about that and my dead hamster and other things that are more serious. So I get a laugh out of reading it now, and it's cathartic now as a published book, as
Yes,
well as when I wrote it.
and I've seen that you've won a couple of awards. Would you like to? I'm going to give you the opportunity to mention them. So would you like to share with our listeners the awards that you've won with this book?
I've won a Living Now Book Award in the category of, I forget now, I think it's senior living, caregiving in the caregiving category, which was
That's
nice.
wonderful.
Yes, yes. And then Shelf Unbound magazine um, chose my book as a notable book. I've won a couple,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that that will
It's good to
help.
get that recognition, though,
Yeah,
that it's
yeah,
really helping people, obviously. That's why you're
yes.
winning those awards. I mean, not, obviously it's very well written, but I mean, it really is speaking to people.
Yes, I'm hoping that that gives publicity to the book because when you're published by a small press, they don't have the money to really publicize your book. And I'm hoping that through these awards, the award committees will spread the word as well. Because I've had people who've told me they've read my book, they've laughed, they've cried, they laughed out loud. They want to have dinner with me and my husband because they want to talk more about the book. And I think maybe a few hundred people have read it. I would like for more people to read it.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
hoping
And
more people can
well,
see it.
the internet turned our industry on its head, right? And
Yes.
I also wrote a book, but it wasn't like your book. I had a self-syndicated column that was published throughout the country, and it was really a compilation with a little bit of new material. So totally different kind of thing. And it was a small press also. But from all of the authors I've talked to, even with the major publishers, you're still doing a lot of your own PR for this these days. It's not like it was, in the 80s and earlier, for instance. You still have to hit the ground running and really, do a lot of speaking engagements and stuff with your own websites and social media and all of that. Get on programs like you're on our program, do as much of that as you can because they're just not going to spend the time that they used to spend decades ago on a book.
Right,
The
right.
author has to be really big time into the process now. I mean,
Mhm.
have you heard that from other authors as well?
Oh, that is true, definitely. My first book, I hired a publicist, very expensive, and she did a
Yes.
great job. This book, I went back to some of the same contacts she went to for my first book myself. So I just really on the coattails of a publicity that was done for the first book, I went to those same sources without paying and have used many of those
Smart.
to get people to promote this
Well,
book.
you learned from the first time around, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
good for
yes.
you. A little bit of the book was about some of your mom's missed opportunities. And, I thought that that's a big subject for our audience. A lot of our readers, they're either dissatisfied with the job they're in now, or perhaps they're ready to retire, or they just want to find something new but they're afraid to make that leap, or they're afraid of, the unknown, or, they're not ready maybe to make the next step, or they think they're not ready, even though they are. And that whole idea of missed opportunities, and maybe it wasn't even the person's fault, it was, circumstances in their lives or whatever, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and maybe what you've learned from family members or friends or your mom or others who didn't get to do absolutely what they wanted to do, and for those that are out there who are afraid to take that leap, what do you want to say to them?
Well, my mother grew up during segregation in the South, and you would think that after all these decades and generations that American slavery wouldn't have had a role in how things progressed to this day, but I'm sure that a lot of what my mother did not get was due to a couple of generations back of enslaved Africans and the way they had to deal with the probably PTSD, basically, of the way you're being treated and beaten and all those kinds of things. So in my mother's case, her mother only got a seventh grade education.
Mm.
And my mother was one of several siblings, and the way you were treated as a black person in the South at that time didn't make you think that you could do whatever you
You
wanted
could
to
do
do,
it.
unless your family had money, they could send you to college. My family didn't. My parents families did not have money. My dad went to the military, then they got married. My parents got married, moved north, and my father fulfilled his dream of opening up a business. My mother supported him. They co-owned a business, but it wasn't what she wanted to do. She was supporting his dream. She had my sister and me, and that was something beautiful that she loved having us and raising us. And she had a nice social circle, but she didn't have a career that she wanted to have. She didn't have the confidence to look for her own job that she would be satisfied with. And that fueled me. That fueled me to always feel that I want to fulfill my dreams.
Yeah,
But in my case, mom and dad were determined to make sure I had a different kind of life. That's why
yeah,
they came north. And I can remember, they signed me up for, the Girl Scout troop and all these different activities where you're as a child, you're empowered to think you can accomplish things. So in
absolutely.
my case, I've done most of what I wanted to do. Got married later in life, which is fine. I'm very happy. Didn't have children. So you can't have everything. That's what it seems like. But I've had careers. I was a journalist early on at the newspaper I worked at. It didn't work out. I got let go after a couple of years. I was devastated, but I was able to pick myself up and go to work for other organizations
It's
doing
all
public
about that.
relations. I
Mhm.
did television news for a while. That worked
I
out very
saw
well
that.
for a while. For a while,
Is that scary, Lisa?
yes, yes. But after a while, my career was going downhill. Left that, but I was able to pick myself up, and I've written books. I work for a affordable housing nonprofit. I enjoy my work. So things have worked out. I think the resilience was something that mom didn't have when it came to career. The resilience wasn't there for her because of not having confidence. That came from her nuclear family.
Yes,
So I would say that if you can, for people who can't, if you can go out there and fulfill your dreams, go ahead and try. Go ahead and do it. And if you're not sure, uh, I'm sure there's support groups or your friends who are doing great things. Tag along with them. That can
yes.
help your confidence.
And where your mom's concerned, it sounds like she did have confidence, though, in the most important job, which was raising the next generation and taking care of
Yes.
her family, too, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's just really important in itself. So she sounds like she was a wonderful woman, and your dad, too. So I would like to give you a minute or two to talk about, are there any projects in the midst for Lisa, if you want to mention your previous book or anything you'd like to tell listeners?
Well, my previous book, my novel is the title is The Talking Drum, and that was published in 2019. And at the time, my mother was very sick, but on her deathbed, a few weeks before she passed away, she said that she was so proud of me. Before she got really sick, before it got to the point where she couldn't really do much, she was on the phone after her chemo treatments, on the phone, raspy voice, getting her club sisters and her sorority sisters to buy a copy of my book.
Oh,
That was special. That was special. And she said, and she also said to me, Lisa, in general, Lisa, I am just so proud of you.
oh.
And a few days later, she passed away. So that was a beautiful thing.
So
So my
just
non,
knowing your mom knew about that first book, you know,
Yes. And
fuels
she and
you
she
too, I'm sure. Yeah.
she read quite a bit of it. And my dad, we got him into assisted living after mom passed away, which is a whole nother drama because he didn't want to go, but he needed to go. And he had one of the aides read up to page 36 for him. And he told me on a Zoom call, I read to page 36 of your book, Lisa. So I had a copy of the book on display in his suite at the memory
Oh,
care
that's
unit.
great. I love that, Lisa. That's wonderful. That's
Thank you.
wonderful.
And
Well,
that book,
yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
the book is about gentrification, a historical novel taking place in 1970 about three couples and how gentrification affected their lives and their neighborhood. And I will say also, but going back to grief, I am writing a chapter for an anthology about people who have grieved loved ones who passed away from cancer. That's something I'm
Oh,
working on. Also, I'm doing a series of workshops on caregiving for the caregiver, because people who are taking care of their loved ones, sometimes they forget about themselves
oh
and
my
they end up
goodness.
getting
Yeah.
sick. They end up not taking care of themselves. Sometimes the caregiver will pass away before the person they're
I
caring for
know.
because they're not taking care of themselves. So I'm doing some workshops this year in different venues about taking care of yourself as you're taking care of your loved
Oh
one.
my goodness, that's so important for our community, Lisa. So please stay in contact with us on that. I'd love to do something about that in the magazine. I really
Okay,
would. So
okay,
let's
great.
let's let's continue to have conversations, please, and stay in touch. It was
Yes.
wonderful having you today. It's such an honor to have you on, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you're going to continue to write more books. You're a beautiful writer. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you so much.
I'll close as I always do by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today.